All right, we can get started whenever you're ready, but if you want to give it a couple of moments, I still see folks signing in.
Yeah, let's give it a few. People who told me they were going to be on haven't signed in yet, so yep. Dan, these are the political junkies that are on the community board.
It is probably true that most people are not their first time here at our meetings, but we'll just let our intern Tucker give a couple of pre-meeting talking points for anybody who might be at their first CB8 committee meeting.
Hey, Tucker, why don't you do that while we're waiting for people to sign in?
All right, awesome. I'll go ahead with that. Welcome, everybody. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except committee co-chairs Anthony Cohn and Sherry Weiner, and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up one, just make sure you get the emojis right, and only press it once so that way it doesn't switch it back down, because if you press it twice, it'll go down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only, for help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go into the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your hand or wave at the screen because we probably won't be able to see you. There's a lot of people here, so scrolling down will be difficult to keep track of everybody. Message me if you have any issues. I'm here for support. And that is it.
Okay. I guess we could start. Hi, I'm Sherry Weiner on behalf of I'm the co-chair of Voting Reform Task Force, and on behalf of myself and my co-chair, Anthony Cohn, we'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the Voting Reform Task Force. I'm sure all of you know that we've just gone through redistricting on the federal level and the state level, and lo and behold, it's time for the city to do their redistricting, which I'm sure most of us didn't even think about. So the Voting Reform Task Force is very pleased to present this program on the City Council redistricting. Frankly, I had hoped to do a follow-up meeting on the Board of Election Reform, which we had one meeting, but I hear that the legislation is stalled in Albany, so we're going to hold off on that. This becomes even more relevant when non-citizens are going to be allowed to vote. An estimate of 800,000 people are going to be able to vote, and we're going to have separate ballots for citizens and non-citizens. So if you think the Board of Election was not functioning well prior, wait till the next election, then we're really going to have problems. But we're not talking about that tonight. That may be a future meeting. Anyway, so tonight we're talking about how the City Council is going to redistrict and establish new lines based on the census. We are very pleased tonight to have as our speaker Dan Kaminsky, who's the policy manager of Citizen Union. Citizen Union is really the only group in the city who has focused on the City Council redistricting. And I guess it's just really not a sexy topic, but we know how redistricting can really make differences on who represents you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dan to run. Oh, one thing, in addition to Dan talking to us about the process, he's also going to give us a training to tell us how we can participate in the process, which I thought would really be interesting. And he's going to talk to us about how to create our own maps and how to testify before this council's district commissions, and the elements of effective testimony, which we can all use as we speak to other groups. So with that introduction, I'm pleased to introduce Dan Kaminsky. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And I will say the timing was pretty incredible. We are in the process of reaching out to hundreds of groups throughout the city to try and get folks involved. And Sherry is the only person in New York City that reached out to us. So that is an awesome distinction. Good job. So I'm really thrilled to be here. This is, a round of applause for that. You deserve it.
I think what article was it? There was
we recently published a report and it got a little press about this process. So
name was in there. So I said, let's go get them. Great.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
So as I said, really a pleasure to be here. Sherry gave a pretty good introduction. I'm actually going to share my screen if that's okay. Let me, let's see if this works. Okay. All right. Do folks see?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is, as Sherry mentioned, our council redistricting training. Just to start out with, so my name, as Sherry mentioned, is Dan Kaminsky. I'm the policy manager at Citizens Union Foundation. Citizens Union Foundation has been around since 1897, and we've been doing good government work for accessibility, transparency, ethics for, as said, literally over a century. And then in terms of redistricting, we've been monitoring both the city and the state process for decades. And often the role we played has been sort of a watchdog or an advocate to make sure it's more independent, more fair, more open. And we are doing that work this time as well. But we're coupling that with the citizen engagement part, which is this, where we're trying to educate as many people as we possibly can and get as many people as we possibly can involved in this process. So along those lines, I mean, full transparency, that is really my goal here tonight, is to kind of convince you that this is super important and hopefully to get as many of you to be willing to testify before the districting commission when the hearings come around. So that's the overarching goal. A little bit more, it's kind of a layer under that. The three major points that we're hoping to hit on is what is redistricting, what is the basics of it, why it's important, and how to get involved. And within that, so within what's redistricting, talking about the criteria that the maps are required to use when they're drawn, why all of that is important, why those criteria are important, how they affect you, how the process unfolds in terms of what are the stages, what's the timeline, everything like that. And then in terms of getting you involved, all of the logistics around testifying, how to look at and hopefully create your own maps. That sounds super overwhelming, but it's much more attainable than I think it may sound at first thought, and how to give an effective testimony. So that's what we got on for tonight. Before we actually jump in, though, I just want to give a second. Is there anything that is not being talked about that folks do want me to talk about?
Dan, why don't you give the timeline that when the map has to be done? I think that's important.
100%, will do. Anything else? I see a hand.
Yeah, Boaz. You can, thanks. Go ahead.
Hey, guys, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you, boss.
Hey, Dan. Looks like a very interesting topic, but I'm from the public. I'm not from the community board. I'm not the community board, the 8th member. And I'm just curious, what are we talking about? I understand we're talking about maps, but can you give a little bit background? What is the context? I mean, that's maybe I lost. I haven't been in the first minute. What are those maps are being used for?
Okay. Awesome segue. So we're gonna jump right in because that's the very first slide. So what we're talking about here today is council redistricting. What council redistricting is the idea that every 10 years after the census happens, by law, the city charter mandates that the city redraw its political boundaries. So folks may have been following what has happened at the state level and the congressional level. Now it's time to come to New York City. And so the new boundaries, and I put the map of the current boundaries on the right here. The new boundaries have to take into account the different population changes that have occurred over the last decade, the different demographic changes that have occurred over the last decade, with the goal of trying to give each district fair and accurate representation. So that's the sort of very basic on what council redistricting is. And as said, it's happening now. Whoopsie, wrong way. Okay, so the first thing to really go over to begin understanding is what the maps what the new district boundaries, what rules they have to follow. So there's a couple basic criteria that they have to follow, and we'll go over each one of these. This is sort of a matrix of constitutional mandates from a federal level, federal laws, state laws, and city laws. So this first one person, one vote, is a constitution mandate, U.S. Constitution. Protecting minority votes is from the 1965 Federal Voting Rights Act. And then these last two are from the city charter. So let's talk about what each one of these means, and again, how it affects your district, members of the public, or things like this. So the first one, and this is probably the most complicated, so I'll want to pause after. The first one is one person, one vote, which is a constitutional mandate. And what it means is that the basic idea of it is everyone should have equal representation. So therefore, districts should be roughly the same size. The idea being if there's one person in one district and 1 million people in another, obviously that's not going to be fair representation for the 1 million. And so all the districts should approximately have an equivalent number. The basic formula for this is you have an ideal population is your total population divided by how many districts there are. So in this little graphic here, I have a 100-person town. If there are 5 districts, my ideal population would be 20 people per district. Now let's move to the reality of New York City. So our new census, we have the largest population of our history. This is the most people we've ever had in our city, and it's 8.8 million people. New York City has 51 different council districts. So the basic math of dividing 8.8 million by 51 council districts, and you get to a population size of about 172,000 people per district. That number may vary slightly in the end, but that's going to be essentially what it is. Now, to add a layer of potential complication to this, obviously, it's essentially impossible to get every single district exactly this number. So there's a 5% deviation allowed from that number. Actually, let me rephrase that. The smallest district can be 5% smaller, or 8,644 people smaller than the largest district in New York City. But another way, and again, this is probably the most complicated one, especially if you don't have a math brain, so hopefully you're following. But the ideal population, 172,000 people, you can go, the largest district can be 2.5% above that number. The smallest district can be 2.5% below that number. To give in real numbers, we see the largest district in New York City can have 177,000 people, and the smallest can have 168,000. So again, let's look at on the reality of the ground, what does this mean for districts around New York City? So one I put here, but I'll actually go to where you all live in a moment. So I put the example of Council District 33, which is these neighborhoods in North and West Brooklyn. Neighborhoods like Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Dumbo. For anybody who's been to any of these neighborhoods in the last decade, you can probably envision the immense amount of residential construction that's happened there over the last 10 years, right? And so their population has exploded. They're at 210,000 people almost. If you remember, the maximum allowed was 177,000 people, right? So they're going to have to shed 35,000 people from their district. How that happens, right? Which blocks, which neighborhoods end up moving to a neighboring district is an incredibly important process that directly affects the people who live in those districts and how they're represented. So it is this sort of thing that we are hoping people from those neighborhoods get involved and say, we think this is how the lines should be drawn to ensure this an XYZ representation. Now, to go to closer to home for all of you. So I'm gonna actually pause the share and then resume up. Sorry. Okay. So, and I will share all these resources. You came with me, right? You're now on a table. Like from your end, you see.
No, we're not.
we're still
No,
seeing.
You're still seeing
we're
the
still seeing
presentation.
the other slide. Yeah.
Okay, let me, oh, sorry, y'all. Pause share. Oh, okay, I see. Okay. Here we go. All right, now we're good, yeah?
yes.
Yes.
Okay, so city council district. So, you know, in terms of where you all live, this is, again, I can share all these resources with Sherry and she can email them out to everybody so you can play around with more. In city council district 4, the population as of 2020 is 184,000 people. Now, again, keep in mind the maximum allowed population for a district is going to be 177,000. So you're going to have to, that district will have to shed about 7,000 people from it. So again, we are hoping that people from this call or from this community can testify about which blocks make the most sense to move into a neighborhood district and which doesn't, because that directly affects who you are represented by. We will get into why, you know, how your representatives matter in a little bit. And the same is true of Council District 5, which again, I'm assuming between these two districts, 4 and 5, it covers just about everyone on this call. Council District 5 has a population of 181,000 people, which is about 4,000 people over. So these are the sort of conversations that the district commission will be having. And these are the sort of conversations that local voices are really important to get involved with. So,
Dan, do you have any idea which districts are below the number that need?
yeah, so here, you know what, let me go back. So firstly, again, that's a great question. This is a really useful thing to play around with. And this is from the Department of City Planning. And again, I'll send it out. It has all the council districts, so starting from Council District 1. So theoretically, you could look all you want and it has the full breakdowns. Offhand, I know that within Manhattan, I know that the council districts uptown, Washington Heights and Inwood and those districts did lose population, if I'm not mistaken. And so they are below. In terms of immediately surrounding you, I would have to do a little looking.
So basically if 4 and 5 are over, so it would the line would have to move perhaps lower, I guess. I mean, the north boundary line of the districts must have to move lower to bring our number down, I'm thinking conceptually.
There's a lot of different ways that they can end up doing it. And I think that would take like really looking at the maps and thinking about what makes the most sense. But in many ways, you know, Citizens Union isn't trying to take the role too much of advising on lines. We're hoping to give you the information and kind of have you be the tools, because you're the ones in the community and you can probably make a better determination about what makes sense to be in what council district more than I can, as I'm not from the area.
Oh, interesting.
Great question. And just in general, I want to pause before I move on to the next criteria. This is, I said, probably one of the more complicated ones. So are there any questions about that overall? Yeah, Buzz. And let me know if I didn't answer your first question too. I can elaborate better if I didn't.
You answer. I have the very, very good. The first slide, perfect. Now a follow-up question, again, stupid question because I don't have the background. No such thing. I like it. Okay. So first of all, why the community boards don't match the districts? Why we are community board 8 and not the community? I don't know. I'm community board 5, like the district. That's the first question. The second question, I saw from the data that you showed, they're like in District 5, 9,000 vacant housing apartment or something like that. That's a lot. I mean, why they are vacant? It's like rich people that have, I don't know, apartments here for summer, I don't know. Where did I see? A vacant housing unit in 2020, almost 10,000 vacant housing. This is a lot. I mean, I'm wondering if they know what's going on with those 10,000. Maybe it belongs to Russian oligarch, and who knows? The next question and the last question. So now I understand the mission, the mapping, and everything. Why don't you put it in some kind of a computer algorithm, crunch the data, and then tell the people, for example, community board, this is the optimal. This is what we need. This is the optimal map that we should go. That's basically the question.
Cool. So good questions. I will have. Well, hopefully I'll satisfy the answers to whatever degree. So in the first one about community boards and the mismatch. So there are 59 community boards in New York City, and there are 51 city council districts. The reasoning behind that, and why the differing numbers and the differing, I don't have offhand, but the community board maps are its own process that the mayor drives, and that happens in 2 years. So this is how you will be represented at the city council level, but then how different neighborhoods are apportioned into different community boards, that happens on the 4 of every decade. So 14, 24, 34, and that's a mayor driven process. And it's not nearly as much citizen engagement as this one. This one really, in many ways, citizens have a potentially large role in this process, different for community boards. 2, the vacant housing. We do good government work, not housing work. And I also wouldn't be able to answer that offhand. Probably important, and that's something to look into. And certainly there's a very active housing advocacy space but I'm not going to attempt an answer on that. I have ideas, but I don't want to, throw out an answer on that. Gosh, and your third question, the computer algorithm. So if this were only about numbers, I think that sort of solution may be talked about. We're going to see that the criteria that needs to be used to draw these maps is actually rather extensive. And a lot of it is about personal testimony. So someone saying, I'm a part of this community of interest, and which we'll get into in ways that probably a computer couldn't pick up. So, and having citizens engage and say what part of their community is important to them and where it should be involved. Again, not something I think a computer would do so great at. So, okay, awesome questions all around. So now let me move on to the remaining criteria here for how the maps are drawn. So the next one is protecting minority votes. So that first one was a US constitutional mandate. The second one is also a federal mandate from the Voting Rights Act from 1965. And it prohibits diluting the voting power of both racial and language minority groups. And the city charter has something similar. So here, just a basic example, right? Of the idea behind it. If let's say this is a minority group of some sort, if they're drawn like this, they can have significant voting power. If the maps are drawn like such, their voting power is diluted, and that would be forbidden. Now, important to say about this year is this is the first year in city council in recent memory that we do not have to comply by the Voting Rights Act, the main provision of it, which is called pre-clearance. So to back up a little bit and explain what this means, kind of the heart of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is this idea about pre-clearance, which says that any jurisdiction that has a history of discrimination cannot implement their changes in voting without having the Department of Justice give a pre-approval. So every year, New York City would have to send in a very large document explaining what the contents of our map were. Now you might say, well, why would New York City do it? Surprise, surprise, we have a history of discrimination in our maps. And so because of that, every decade we'd have to send in this document, which I put this image of, for pre-approval before we were able to redistrict. And importantly, that document went over not only the content of the maps, but the process by which we were able to come up with those maps to ensure that there was a fair and equal opportunity for all voices to be heard, regardless of background and this sort of thing. Now, in 2013, and this is national news, maybe folks know this, the Supreme Court struck down this pre-clearance requirement which means that places all over the country no longer need to send in their changes to the Department of Justice for approval. So this will be the first time in this redistricting process that New York City does not have to send our maps in. Now, in light of that, something that Citizens Union, we have a pretty long list of recommendations on how to ensure that this is a fair and transparent process. One of our recommendations was that the commission should publish not only the maps, but how they came to those maps, and the underlying population data they used, and their logic behind it, and their process, so that, just to ensure, again, a fair and open process. So that's the second requirement. The third, these last two are fairly simpler. Districts have to be contiguous. So, and if they're not, New York City is a cluster of islands, they have to be connected in some way, be it a bridge or a tunnel or something like this. I gave this example of Council District 8, which is separated by water, but again, there are bridges connecting it. So, that is allowed. And we think of the potential reasons why, if a district is not contiguous, what someone may be experiencing in one part of the district may be totally different than what someone else is in a different part. So, and the third, I'm using the exact same map, is this idea of crossover districts. So the districts by and large should be contained within a county. But if they cannot, right, it says to the greatest extent possible, they should not cross the county lines. If they have to, it can only happen one time per set of 2 boroughs, meaning, Council District 8 comes into Manhattan, has part of the South Bronx here and part of Manhattan. No other district can go into both Manhattan and the Bronx. That's the only time that can happen with that set of 2 boroughs. And that is all for the required. Now I'm going to jump into the not required, but as much as possible. So these 4 criteria, the idea is to accomplish them as much as can reasonably be allowed. And the order to which they are accommodated is the order to which I put them here, meaning, or a priority is the order here. So this first one is the top priority for map makers and rather the districting commission to follow. And then, as said, in descending order of priority. This first one, keeping neighborhoods and community of interest intact, is really the hinge of most people's testimony when they're engaging with the commission. So it is really one to think about. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one, and then the other 3 we'll go through a little bit more quickly. So community of interest. Let's first just give a basic definition, right? So I'm going to read this more or less verbatim. A community of interest is a neighborhood, community, or group of people who have common policy concerns and would benefit from being maintained in a single district. Another way of understanding community of interest is that it's simply a way for a community to tell its own story about what neighborhoods share in common, what neighbors share in common, and what makes it unique when compared to surrounding communities. It's defined by the local community members. So what I think should stand out about this is that there is no strict criteria for what is and what is not a community of interest. Really, you are the definer of your community of interest, and whatever you define as your community is pretty much the sound definition. So I'll give some examples here. So ethnic, racial, and economic groups. So one note about that is race alone can't be a community of interest. So I can't say I'm of the same racial background as my neighbors, therefore we are a community of interest. But you can say I'm from the same country of origin, or I speak the same language as the people around me, and therefore we should be contained in a community so that that language or country of origin or outlook is represented on the city council. Economic groups, right? If you're, whatever class you may be in. Religious affiliations, whether you go to the same mosque or the same shul or the same church or, whatever other religion you may behold to, that can absolutely be a community of interest. Areas within a single school district, right? Let's say you're within a school district and as are your neighbors, and you want all of that school district to remain in a council seat. so that that school district's concerns are represented at the level of the council. My gosh, public transportation. I mean, we all think about that all the time, mostly as New Yorkers, right? So let's say you take the bus and the B48 bus has been just nonstop failing on you, and you and your neighbors all take that bus. That can totally be a community of interest because you think that that need needs to be represented on the council. And if they split up the B48 bus line or whatever it may be, maybe that won't have as strong of a representation as you need. Communities that share similar professions. Let's say you live around mostly nurses or, you know, doctors or things like this, and you want that perspective to have a voting block to be represented on the council and the concerns that might be warranted by that voting block, right? So really whatever you see as your community of interest, whatever you see as a share of policy concerns that people around you might share similarly. And it is the latitude here is pretty great for you to define what that might be. So I put a bunch of questions in here to help you begin to think about what a community of interest might be. So, you know, again, same things as we were just talking about. Where are you living? Where are you going to school? Groceries? Where's your closest hospital? What train station? Can you walk to essential stores? What services do you rely on? Is there an environmental concern that is important to you? An economic concern, et cetera. So again, I want to pause here because this is really an important piece of the puzzle. Are there questions? Are there just ideas about what people's community of interest is? Any comments? And really anything to say?
Seeing none.
Cool. I'll take that as a.
That's because you're doing a good job, Dan.
We're keeping up.
I appreciate that. But, you know, again, I just want to make sure since there's plenty of information here. Okay. So my disclaimer on this slide is that I'm in the political world. I have zero expertise in graphic design. So please excuse my poorly designed pattern of geometric shapes here, but hopefully it gets through the point. So my goal here is to demonstrate why this matters, right? So pretend that this larger square is our city or however, you know, whatever geographical area you want to think about. And then these are 4 districts within that town or that city. And they're split up by these lines here. And this gray circle is your community of interest, whatever that may be, right? Anything that we just talked about, your, you know, school district or your bus line or your religious community or whatever. If the lines are as such, right, and your community of interest is split up in such a way, and these other circles are other community of interests, whoever ends up representing this red square, right, to the council, chances are they're going to take these communities of interest far more seriously than they'll take this one, right? It'll be this little sliver of a gray circle that they may have in their district. And that's going to have negative aspects for you, right? I mean, obviously, not having effective representation matters, but it really does matter. It matters in terms of funding, right? Maybe that community of interest, whatever the issue area is going to receive less funding, and therefore the conditions will get worse. Or maybe it's legislation that you really need passed that you can't get an advocate for because, you know, they're not really taking the concern seriously. Whatever it may be, right? These things really do matter. And so the redistricting process gives us the opportunity to think about something like this, right? And so this is the same amount of space, and yet now whoever is representing this red district is very much going to be taking the Gray's community of interest concerns rather seriously, right? So again, pardon the lack of strong graphic design skills, but hopefully it makes the point of why redistricting matters and how it can ensure that your voices are heard in the ways that they need to be heard. Okay, and then along that first criteria is keeping neighborhoods intact. So this is an issue that we see in all 5 boroughs. I put a map here of Richmond Hill, which is in Queens. The blue shaded in is the boundaries of the neighborhood, and the blue lines are the boundaries of the council districts, right? And so we see that Richmond Hill is cut into 3 different council districts, which means that for people on Richmond Hill who may need representation, well, they're only going to be a sliver of all 3 of these council members' districts. And so their concerns may, I'm not saying they do, but certainly it is quite possible for them to go unheeded in a way that if you're the center of that council member's district, probably wouldn't. And this is something, as said, that happens in all 5 boroughs. So we see it's happening here in Crown Heights, right? The neighborhood is cut into some districts. This is Staten Island. This one's a particularly one that we have our eye on. This is South Brooklyn and Bensonhurst. So we see that Bensonhurst is cut into, I think, 4 different districts, right? So again, the boundaries of the district are the shaded, and the lines are where the council districts are cut. Bensonhurst specifically over the last decade has seen an increase in the Asian American population. So they now have, I think, 40-something% of the neighborhood is of Asian descent. And yet in their council districts, if you look at the council districts, it's, the Asian vote is very much split up. So it's only, 30% and under, not giving them the plurality that they actually have, right? So these are, again, the sorts of things to look at. And some more examples in Manhattan, we have Harlem is cut in half, downtown Lower East Side, the Bronx, Morrisania. But again, this is a pretty pervasive problem. Now, and just to be clear, that first one, keeping neighborhoods and communities of interest intact, is not one of the required criteria. It's one of the criteria that the commissioners should pay as much attention to and try as hard as they can to ensure that it doesn't happen. And then in order of descending, so these next 3, the next one here is compactness. So a district should be as compact as possible. I put the example here of District 32 in Southern Queens. Now, obviously, geography prevents this from having an easy answer, but we see the challenges that this poses having an uncompact district, right? If you live on the tip of the Rockaways here versus someone who lives, at the northern end of Ozone Park, they're going to have two very different sets of concerns, two very different sets of experiences, and therefore their representation needs are going to be different. And similarly, I mean, another aspect of this is, let's say I live at the northern edge of Ozone Park here, and the council member's office is way down here on the western tip of the Rockaways. That's an hour and a half commute to get to her. That's not, that doesn't make for easy engagement. And then the final criteria here is to prevent partisan gerrymandering. Now, the thing in New York City is that partisan gerrymandering is actually less the issue because that's just not really the political dynamics of New York. More so, the concern is that, since the commission is appointed by political candidates, or political incumbents rather, the concerns come from having lines that favor or oppose sitting incumbents or potential future candidates. And so that's the conflict of interest we're more looking into. The example here is, there's this example of Vito Lopez. I don't know if folks remember that from 10 years ago, but Vito Lopez was an assembly member who represented Brooklyn, represented part of Bushwick. He was in a bunch of sexual harassment scandals, and everyone was calling for his resignation around that time. So a Lopez ally met with the head of the district commission to ask that the district commission to redraw the lines to allow for a potential Vito Lopez run in the city council. It's those sorts of things that, and ultimately this was uncovered. The lines were thrown out, new lines were drawn, but it's these sorts of things where, drawing lines for political gain or loss are the types of things to look out for in New York. And just the example, I called it veto mandering, since it's after veto instead of Jerry. That's where gerrymandering gets its name. But we see that the lines were just carved out to allow, I believe he lived in this little blue section here. The lines were just carved out to allow him to run. Ultimately, that got thrown out, and this were the lines of District 34. Okay, and then the final slide of this section before, again, I'll take a pause, is so I've tried to embed as much as possible why this matters in the conversation about the criteria, but to sort of hit it more directly, what do council members do and why does it matter for an everyday person? So council members have really direct powers that influence the lives of everyday people in their districts, arguably as much, if not more, than assembly members and state and any other level of government. So to go through some of the big ones, the first is this tradition of member deference on land use rezoning applications. So historically, the local council member, however they vote, the rest of the council follows, giving them pretty extraordinary powers to affect the built environments, how neighborhoods feel, what type of land uses happens in a given area within the council. And so obviously
this is a sore point for us.
I was about to say, you literally cut me off. I said, you all have a chip on your shoulder because of the blood bank. You cut me off by a sentence, but in a general statement, obviously it didn't go that way with Ben Kallos and last year, but as a general statement, the second is discretionary funding. So council members get millions of dollars to spend in their district. And that, again, can very directly impact the lives of people in the neighborhoods. Third is, obviously, it's the legislative body of New York City. So having a member who understands your community of interest or your viewpoint or your demographic or whatever it may be, and represents that viewpoint, they can introduce legislation that directly affects, obviously, all of us, but certainly the quality of life or whatever you may be concerned about in your neighborhood. They provide budgetary oversight. So, and they provide a vote on the budget, which is, I mean, budgets, it's hard to understate how important they are. It's hard to overstate, I should say, how important they are. They are really, in many ways, the lifeblood of our polity here. And then they provide constituent services at the most local level. So council members, really quite important. And all these lines very much impact, how representation happens. I see a hand from the lovely May Malik, who I had the pleasure of meeting, was it this week on an endorsement call? So good to see you again, May.
A few weeks ago. Good to see you, Dan. I hope you can you all hear me?
I can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Anthony and Sherry, for putting this together. This is so important. I totally geek out about this stuff. And Dan, it's such a pleasure to have you. I have a question, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead or you've already addressed this, but my understanding is that this is going to be the first time in decades that the U.S. Department of Justice doesn't inspect the city's plans for potential discrimination. Is that right? And if so, like, what is your thought on that? And how do we overcome that, considering, veto mandering and candidate-based gerrymandering and things like that?
I thank you, May. And again, good to see you. I did cover that, but I'll just go over it briefly, just in case you missed it. So as you mentioned, this is the first time that we are not required to submit our maps to the Department of Justice. Just so I don't redo the whole slide, the essence of our recommendation as an organization is that because the Department of Justice will not be looking at our maps and our process, we're hoping, or we're advising the commission to release essentially the same information. So the information that the commission used to have to send to the Department of Justice was a pretty long manual. I mean, this image is from the front page of a 300-page document on the process and the content of the maps. We're hoping the commission will do the same, release underlying population data and underlying logic and a justification for why they chose the maps they did, and an overview of the process to ensure that all voices were heard in a fair and accurate way. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
No, of course. Again, great question. And that's a super important point to check in on. Anything else before we move on to, so that was everything I had to say about how the maps were drawn and what the legal criteria is going to be for them. But any final comments on that process before, or on that criteria before moving on to how it's going to unfold? No. Okay. So the process. So the first thing here is the district commission has been appointed. They were appointed on the last part of it, they were appointed on March 7th. So tonight, actually, literally as we speak, is their first meeting at City Hall. Our policy director is there monitoring that. So how this works, who's on the commission? So the mayor has appointed 7 members. The minority conference of the city council has appointed 3 members, minority conference meaning the Republican Party, and the majority conference of the city council has appointed 5 members, majority conference being the Democratic caucus there. So those are the 15 commissioners. They're all set. And once appointed, they'll elect their own chair and hire an executive director and start moving, which is happening, as said, as we speak. The rules on who can be on the commission. So it has to be representative of the city in terms of racial bounds. It does not have any other representation metrics. So something that we have advised is to have gender requirements. Unfortunately, there's only 4 women out of 15 on this commission. That's something we were looking at. The commission can't be controlled by any party. The commission has to have at least 1 member from every borough, and commissioners can't be government or political party officials. So, for example, you can't have the executive director of the Brooklyn Democratic Party or whatever it is on the commission. So that's the rules. Now, in terms of Sherry's original question, how it's all going to unfold. So the deadline for the maps to be due, the first draft of the maps, is June 7th. Historically, they have done a round of preliminary hearings before the draft maps were published. And that has happened in June. They're not required by law to do that, and we don't know if they will do that. Although for maximum citizen engagement, we are advising them to. We are hoping they will. So I say this to say the first round of hearings may be in May. There's a chance. And if they are, people definitely want to make their voices heard about what they believe the maps should include or not, or how they should look. But again, that's not required. We'll find out soon if they're doing that May preliminary hearing. Again, June 7th, the draft maps are due. Then by July 7th, 1 month after that, they have to begin holding hearings. They're only required to hold 1, but historically, the sort of trend has been they hold 1 hearing per borough. So that every borough is heard. So we're hoping they do that as well. And that'll all be throughout July and, parts of the summer. By August 7th, they have to submit those maps. They're not required to change their maps based on citizen feedback, although historically they have, or taken into account, I should say. August 7th, they have to submit their maps to City Council. City Council has 3 weeks to object. If they don't object, the new maps will be in, and that's the end of the process, and it'll be over sometime late summer, early fall. If City Council does object, they can provide feedback on what they object to. Again, the commission does not legally required to change it, but they can. And then their second draft would be due on October 7th. A month after that, similar to before, they'd have to hold hearings. And then in December, they have to submit their final maps to City Council. So this process may be done in September or it may be done in December, depending on how it unfolds. The thing that makes this very different from the state, one of the things, is that at the state level, the legislators held the ultimate power. In the City Council level, they do not. So once the commission submits this final round of maps, if the City Council cannot object to it, it has to be implemented. The commission has ultimate authority on it. If the commission has 9 out of their 15 members to vote for those final maps, they will be adopted, again, regardless of how City Council feels about it at that last round. So that is the timeline. Again, well, okay, I'll just keep on moving since we're cutting close here. Testifying logistics. So here I was hoping to put in all sorts of images on how people to testify. However, because as said, this is the commission's first meeting tonight, literally right now, they have not yet announced what their hearing dates will be, what their process will be, how to sign up to testify, anything like this. So at the moment, I have nothing for you. It's just blanks. Well, it's the Redistricting Commission's website. And as we see that first meeting, Tuesday, March 29th at 6 p.m., it's happening at City Hall. But when we do have more details on how to sign up, the link to go to, and when the hearing dates are, I'll send that along to Sherry, and she can blast it out to the rest of the group of attendees. Same as said. So currently a blank slide, but hopefully it will be pretty soon that we get some information on where and when this all starts to unfold. Okay, so now analyzing maps. This can feel intimidating. It really doesn't have to be, I promise you. So hopefully we can make this kind of lower. So the first part about it, to be able to analyze the map, the first thing you got to know is your current map. Where are your current boundaries? How does it currently look? My guess is, since a lot of you, many of you are involved in the board, maybe you already know this, but if you go to the council's website and you type in your address, so here I'm pretending I live at 1 Times Square. I don't, I promise, but just for the sake of this, you type it in, and then it comes up with the map of the district and who the member is. And if you click, you can learn more about your member. You can see where the district office is, which is very useful to know. And then you can see kind of a more zoomed in map of where your current boundaries are. So that's about where you currently are. And then, which I showed you before, the Department of City Planning has all these breakdowns, which is also useful to know about how big your council district is, the demographic breakdown, the housing breakdown, all this sort of thing. So you can begin to piece together who's in the district currently and how should it look moving forward. Okay, how to find the draft maps. Again, that is blank because they haven't published the draft maps. Once they do on June 7th, it'll be on the Districting Commission's website. Again, all these links I'll pass along to Sherry. Okay, so once the maps do come out, the things to look for, really everything we've already talked about, but things that should be raising eyebrows. If your neighborhood gets cut in half, that's the sort of thing that you may want to flag. If your district ends up in a really weird shape or with weird lines or weird squiggles or is excessively long in any way, that's the sort of thing that you're going to want to at least contemplate. Where your representative's office is in relation to you. So I mentioned this before, right? If you're 2 hours away from your rep, that's probably an issue. Think about where your neighborhood is within the district. So if you're only a sliver of the district, your neighborhood, that might be something that you'll want to raise. And then, is your community of interest in the district? Is the whole thing in the district, or how is it sectioned off, or kind of what are the lines there? Now, creating your own map. So this is a very effective strategy, or very important strategy for testifying. If it feels like too much for you, something is better than nothing. So, you can skip it, but definitely if you have the means or a little bit of time, it's worth creating your own map. There's a lot of really helpful software to do this. The one that we're recommending here is a website called Representable. And how it works, it's pretty user-friendly. So you get the map of the city, and then you just click the census tracts that you think should be in your district. And it has a population counter so you can keep within the bounds, right? So remember, population goal is in that 168 to 177 frame. So you can just keep on clicking until you get there, and going by census tract. So this is the district I created. I did so in a way that I hope is very obvious, that it's not a district I'm actually recommending, but just to, for visual purposes. So you just click all the census tracts that you want. It gives you your population counter. I'm within the bounds, right? 172,000, and good. And then from there, you can download as a PDF and send right into the commission. So this can be a really useful tool in showing the commission, not just telling them, hey, I believe that you shouldn't cut off this, or you should add this to the district, but showing them physically, this is, as a community member, this is what I believe the district should look like. Another tool that may be helpful is Google Maps has a feature that helps you create your own district boundaries. The issue with that one is it doesn't have a population counter attached to it, so you can't actually, know how big your neighborhood is. And then one more tool, just for people to know about, is New York City's Population Fact Finder tool, which allows you to do the exact same thing, click by census tract. And in those census tracts, you can see the breakdown of age and race, ethnicity, housing, all of these sorts of demographic information to help give you a better picture of the type of district you're creating. And that is the map making. So any questions or anything on these last few sections here?
Yeah, Dan, I have a basic question, and I've been texting some of the community board members. Do you know if community boards can participate as a community board to have an opinion on a map? I know we were not permitted to participate in the charter change questions. It was deemed too political. So I'm wondering, and if anybody has any thoughts on this, can Community Board 8 actually have an opinion and opine on the proposed maps or not? Dan, do you know, or does the community board member, anybody else on the board have an opinion?
So here's what I can say offhand is that, like, right off is you, during your testimony, you absolutely can say, I'm a member of CB8. But I think if you were to, if your question is instead asking, like, can CB8 come together,
Yes,
vote on a map together, and then as a board, you would present that to the commission.
yes.
I don't want to say a wrong answer. So I can actually probably text about it and find out before the end of this
Could you,
meeting.
because I think certainly based on the number of community board members who are on this call, if we were permitted, I think we would want to, have an opinion, but I'm just not sure as a community board, if we can testify on behalf of the community, pass a resolution and do our normal process. So if you could do a little research on that for us, either speaking to the borough, last time it was the borough president's office that told us we couldn't be involved in advocating for charter change questions. That would be most helpful.
So
That was because there were things that we were going to be voting on, and you can't tell somebody how to vote.
Right. So do you think
that was their rationale?
So Will, do you think that we could look at a map and I don't know.
I will trust Dan, but or the general counsel, but I think it is a different circumstance for sure.
All right. So maybe
I didn't want to speak without confirmation, so I wanted to shoot a text. My inclination was yes, but I just got confirmation that is yes. So you are allowed as a board to say, okay, we as a board think that you should cut this map out or do this thing or whatever it is. The other thing related is if you can't end up agreeing, because getting 50 heads to agree on anything can be really challenging sometimes, you can say when you are testifying, we'll go through this in a minute, I'm a Community Board 8 member, and I believe that, not speaking for the board, but just establishing yourself, that your credentials, that you're involved in the community already, and that'll add a little more weight to your voice potentially. I see Rita's hand.
I have a question. The primary is in June 2nd. The election is in November. So this year, even though we are electing new state officials, they won't be using the old boundaries and not the new. Is that correct?
So good question, and I can absolutely see why this is confusing. So this June primary is for state assembly, state senate, all the state races. Everything we're talking about right now is city council. So this process is the next city council election will be, the next primary for it will be a year from now for 2023. So those are totally separate elections. And those elections in 2023 for city council, the reason why we're doing another round of election in 2023 instead of a normal 4-year term for council members in 2025 is because of this, right? That the new council, the election has to take into account the new districts, and therefore they're made to run again. So This will affect the 2023 election, not the 2022 one. The 2022 one that you're talking about also has been affected by redistricting, but that one was at the state level. Did that, Rita, I think you're muted.
The state people, somebody asked me to sign a petition, and then they asked me where I live. So it does matter to the state what district you're in.
It totally does, but again, they're absolutely different districts. So the city council district you live in is a different district than the assembly district you live in, which is a different district than the state senate district you live in. So what has already happened is the changes have occurred to congressional, state assembly, and state senate district, and that happened at the state level. So now that process has already finished, although there's lawsuits and things, but essentially that's we're putting that aside. And here we're talking about city council, and that process is just beginning. We're just starting the council redistricting process to affect who your city council member is and who represents you at the city hall level.
Thank you.
No problem. Great question. I see Ed Hartzog.
Hi, Dan. Thanks. Hey, a great presentation. And I don't want to disagree with you, but I was going to say, I don't believe the reason why we're having back-to-back city council elections in 23 and 25 is because of the decennial census. I believe it was carved out in the 89 city charter revision. There's a provision in there for back-to-back city council elections in 01 and 03 and 23 and 25, but we did not have one in 13 and 15.
Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, so this is a result of the 89 Charter Commission. It happens every 20 years, and it is a response of the census. But if we do the math, right? So, and again, so the new elections for a 2-year term have to take into account the new districts that the districting commission does, and that happens every 10 years. The reason the elections are on 2-year cycles every 20, this is just because of the math. So let's just do it together. So if we have a 23 election, a 25 election, a 29 election, then a 4-year term would be 2033. So it already lands on the 3, which is and then 37, 41, and then 43. So it's every 20 just because of how the math works out. But it is in direct response. So every 10 years, this is the redistricting cycle, and then it will change, Yeah.
For the quirk that I see. So the quirk.
Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Because I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, why are we skipping the 10 years? Because I saw it in the charter and it seemed unusual. And then, because we're landing in 13.
That's exactly right. Okay. So this final section, which I think I can breeze through fairly quickly, but is certainly an important one. Elements of an effective testimony. So this is the basics. There's a couple models out there for how to think about testifying. This is the basics that I thought was the most intuitive or sort of user-friendly of them, that just takes you through how to testify. So things to answer: who are you? What's the issue? Why is this an issue? And how should it be resolved? And if you answer those 4 things, I believe you have given an effective or successful testimony. So let me take us through each of those in turn. So the who, first thing to say, your name, where you live. That may feel uncomfortable, but because this is because we're talking about maps, placing yourself in a geographic location is actually very important in helping them consider, okay, how do you fit into this conversation? Personal background, here I say keep it brief. So something to mention, you only get 3 minutes, most likely. And I say most likely, again, they haven't submitted, the district commission hasn't yet fulfilled what their rules are and all this, but most likely it's gonna be 3 minutes. So you don't have a lot of time. So this is really just a sentence. And then organizational affiliation if relevant. So as mentioned before, if you're a member of CB8 or any other organization, helpful to have that to establish credentials. If you don't, that is totally okay. Obviously, the more people who are testifying, the better. So I put in this example here from someone's testimony 10 years ago, tried to black out, her things, but says, "Good evening. My name is blank." Okay, so name. "I have been a Queens resident for more than 10 years and live at blank in Rego Park," right? So she establishes credentials by how long she's lived there. Okay, she's been there 10 years. So this is someone who knows the community most likely, and where she lives. Next one, "I am a counselor at Baruch College." So that's the personal background. She does in one sentence, 6 words or something like that. Great. They can picture, okay, where is she coming from? And then "I'm testifying as a 10-year member of OCA." So and then a brief description of OCA. So that who is, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but does all of those things, I think, really succinctly and well to establish the credentials to, place her and give her some weight. So that's who. Next, what? So another way to think about this is, what is your main point? So why are you here? What is the issue or concern? If the commission is going to remember one thing about why you're standing in front of them, what is that thing? So some examples. I live in this city council district, and the maps that you all have published split, and then I put in parentheses, my community of interest, whatever that may be. Maybe it's, again, your synagogue or your whatever, into multiple city council districts. And I'm here because I want to ensure that that's in one council district. So just the basic, okay, this is what's going on. We'll get to the why in a moment, why it matters, but this is the thing that I'm concerned about. I put in 2 alternatives. One is, a lot of people are going to be thinking about ways in which the council splits their community, but it's also totally legitimate to think about, I really liked my old council lines. It ensured that my entire community of interest, or the things that I liked, were all within the council district. So I want you to keep the lines similar. Another option is thinking about, what if the new maps remove something really important from your council district, a hospital or something like this, and you want that hospital to remain in your council district, right? So it's not always splitting. There can be, really however the lines affect you in whatever way. That's the thing. That would be your what. Now, the same person from Rego Park, they just included District 25, and this was from 10 years ago, this person's testimony. District 25 divides Elmhurst at the district's southwest boundary. The boundary excludes an important part of it, the neighborhood that stretches to this place, right? So pretty clearly what the concern is. Okay, now why? Why does this matter, right? So we've expressed that the concern is that, the district doesn't include that south boundary of Elmhurst. Why is that important? How does it affect you? How does it affect your community? And why should they care about it? And then third, is there any evidence to show why it's an issue? And by evidence, actually I have a slide on it. I mean here, so on the one hand, data, and on the other hand, anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence is great. We really, as much as possible, and you can include it, we really want to include data if you have the time to do a little extra research. So, what are the demographic trends that you're alluding to? What is the census data that you're alluding to? Is there any data to show that, budgets have been, your community of interest has been funded less because of how the maps are? Is there any, are there maps that you can submit to accommodate or add into your story? And then, of course, anecdotal evidence, if you have stories about, or you've heard stories or anything that, from the neighborhood about why it matters, all can be really helpful. Okay, the example here, my community of interest is split, and then the data or the evidence you'd use to accompany it would be providing a map. This has meant lack of funding for my community of interest when compared to others. And if you have numbers on this, you'd provide the numbers. And then the lack of funding has meant all sorts of issues for our community, and they've gotten worse, both anecdotally and also informationally. What can you provide? And then you end your testimony with how the issue should be resolved. So what do you want the commission to do? What should they consider? What should they change? You want to be asking in pretty concrete and clear terms, in terms of, physicality. You want to be asking for what you do want, not what you don't want. So I mean to say, don't say, don't move this border to the southwest boundary, but say, I would like it if, right? So frame it in the positive, not the negative. So an example here, straight into the point, please consider lowering the southwest border of whatever avenue or whatever district to include avenues, whatever, so that all of my community can be included in the district. Okay, so I wanted to play a sample testimony from last year. Again, it's just 3 minutes, but I think it does it in, I think this person goes through all those aspects pretty well. Powerhouse testimony in just 3 minutes, just so folks can hear what a district commission testimony sounds like. I'm actually going to stop the share and then restart it. I apologize for that. Okay. All right. Let me know.
Great. Next, we have Derek Evers.
Can you hear it?
Hi, Derek. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you for having me. Dear New York State Independent Redistricting Commission, my name is Derek Evers, and I'm a Democratic District Leader in Assembly District 37B. I'm also a Community Board member of Queens Community Board 5, and I live in the neighborhood of Ridgewood, Queens. And I am speaking to request that Ridgewood be made whole again during the upcoming redistricting. During the 2000 districting, Ridgewood, Queens was dissected in an act of gerrymandering meant to weaken the vote of the immigrant and largely Hispanic populations who live here. The result has worked just as it was intended. Despite being one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in all of Queens, Ridgewood has 2 state senators, 2 assembly members, 2 congressional reps, and 2 city council members. We share our congressional representation with Brooklyn, and we are one of only 3 city council districts to have a portion that crosses boroughs. In maybe the most extreme example of how weakened the vote of Ridgewood residents has become, our sitting assembly member actually lost the plurality of the vote here in 2020, and the Queens portion of Ridgewood voted 75% against our sitting city council member. Along the border, where it was redistricted to Brooklyn, they voted nearly 85% against him. The results stretch well beyond elections as well. The lack of representation has led to inequities in how resources are distributed. Because we border multiple districts, our resources are often centralized miles away in Brooklyn or further into central Queens. We were one of the last neighborhoods to get city-run COVID testing and vaccination sites. We do not have a single hospital in the neighborhood. In a neighborhood that is 50% foreign-born, we do not have a single dual language universal pre-K program and not one universal 3K program. During the most recent heat waves, we didn't have a single cooling center because our libraries and community centers remained closed well after the COVID reopenings. Ridgewood has some of the fewest green spaces in all of New York City, and when COVID forced the closure of playground parks, we were without any outdoor spaces beyond cemeteries for nearly 6 months. We're also at a transit desert, yet we have some of the worst bike infrastructure in the city and have had 0 open streets programs in our neighborhood to date. To make matters worse, Ridgewood has also seen the largest increase in housing prices over the last 5 years of any New York City neighborhood. Displacement is at an all-time high, and the level of gentrification in Ridgewood is so great that it has become the subject of New York Times trend pieces, while neighboring areas are calling themselves Ridgewood to increase their property value. Yet despite the neighborhood's newfound wealth, all of our middle schools still fall way behind SHSAT test results when compared to schools just a mile away. And due to the political gerrymandering of our neighborhood, the Hispanic population is underrepresented in our community board by over 25%. Asian and Black representation is also below population levels, and women are underrepresented by over 50%. In closing, I would just like to finish by saying this is not a Republican versus Democrat debate or right versus left, but ultimately this is a moral debate. Ridgewood is one of the 5 most populous neighborhoods in Queens. It is a historically rich and diverse neighborhood, one of the first in Queens, in fact, and the current districting from congressional all the way to city council has led it to become largely overlooked. At the very least, we deserve to be a proper Queens district and not one who shares its vote with Brooklyn just because we share a border with it. I'm asking the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission to start the process of righting this wrong by making Ridgewood whole again when it redraws the district lines. Thank you for your consideration of my testimony, and I appreciate it. I hope you can make Ridgewood part of one district. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay. So you're still with me, right? You went back to the slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. I showed that there's endless examples, but just to give you an idea, this is someone, he established his credentials pretty well. He said he's a district leader. He said, he's on the community board as well. He went to his what pretty straight away. Ridgewood is split into multiple districts. He talked very extensively about why that matters and how it affects the community, armed with all sorts of stats. If you can find them, great. Again, we really want to lower the intimidation level. So if you cannot find them, we still encourage people to talk about why it matters to them. But if you can and you have the time to look into information, that really can help a testimony, as we saw. And then he ended with an ask, make Ridgewood whole. He made that very clear. That's what he's there for. That's what he's seeking. We're almost done. I know we're just a little over time, but we're almost there. So putting it on paper, again, I can email this to Sherry, but I just put all those questions and you can just type it all up, right? Who are you, where you live, what's the concern, why it's an issue, the evidence, how it should be resolved. If you just essentially fill in those blanks, you'll have a testimony. Now, as you saw, they're very strict about time limits. And so it's a 3-minute time limit, they will stop you after that. But on paper, you can go as long as you want. So you can submit a 20-page document if you want, filled with maps and everything like that. Or you could submit word for word what you say, but your paper really can be a place to elaborate if you need it. Best practices when you're going. So in verbal testimony, as mentioned, be concise and be to the point. Practice ahead of time and time yourself. So because you're only getting 3 minutes, you really want to ensure that you're within that time frame and that you get all your major points in those 3 minutes. Speak clearly. If it's in person, try and make eye contact. And even if it's on Zoom, try and look there as opposed to looking at a sheet or something like this. Any good public speaking tips is remain relaxed. Don't, try not, it's intimidating. I'm not saying it's not, but do your best to take a deep breath and slow yourself down and, speak calmly and relaxedly. Provide a copy of written testimony, as I just mentioned, where you can fully elaborate. If you have the time and capacity to provide a map, that's great. Make sure to thank the commission, right? This is thankless work. It's hard work. So we want to be appreciative of what they're doing. Try not to be accusatory, even if you really dislike the maps. Try not to get into conspiratorial, like you're doing this to screw over, blah, blah, blah. To ask for what you need or what you want or what your community needs or what your community deserves. There's strength in numbers. So if you have an idea of how your community should look, if you testify, that's great. If you get 5 friends to testify, that's even better. If the commission hears it 5 times that the north border should be whatever street instead of whatever street, right? That's going to make more of an impact. And again, trying to lower intimidation levels, something's better than nothing, right? So this is a 3-minute testimony in front of the district commission. Even if you only have a couple of sentences to say, hopefully you will have the time and effort to put into it. But even if you just have one idea that you want to get across, that's better than not doing anything. So we really encourage folks to testify to whatever capacity they're able. And then the final slide here. So just some resources. We will have a website set up very soon. That's going to be a one-stop shop. I'll get to your hand in a sec. We're almost, we'll take as many questions as needed. There'll be a one-stop shop with all the resources, how to sign up, how to testify, all the information, this training, these slides, all the population stuff that we went over. And I will email that website when it's set up. It should be fairly soon. If you have any questions, this is my email address. Please email me. We really want to ensure we're helping the public get involved however they need to be. So really whatever question about the process or, if you're a member of another political club or community group or tenant group or really whatever, we really want to be connecting with as many people as possible. That's kind of a priority throughout the next several months as this process unfolds. So please connect me with them or let them know to connect with me or however you want to do it. But we really want to be talking to people. And these slides, the website, this training will all be public. So if someone doesn't want to go through the whole, coordinating thing, but you just want to send them the slides just so they're aware of the process and helping them engage, we're here for that too. So really happy to do it. And with that, that's it. We'll go to any questions, comments, concerns, really whatever folks want to say. I see Michelle.
Thank you very much, Dan. Very comprehensive. And for a
Good.
person who knew very little about this, this is very informative. I appreciate it. I'm going to take it way, way, way back to a person like me who has to, not sure about the fundamentals. Redistricting is an issue. A presentation is made in that there were changes to the district based on a shift in population. If that premise is correct, how is the presentation formed and by whom and for what reason, aside from population, before it comes to us, the public, in preparation for testimony? In other words, where did we get the basic presentation from, and on what basis was it made aside from population? Do you understand the question?
I hope so. I'll answer. If I haven't understood, then we can ask again. Okay. So there's no presentation, unfortunately. So no one is coming to your community and saying, this is the map. They will publish the draft maps on the website, on the District Commission website for everybody to see. They're required to do that by June 7th. And so they will be made public, and anybody interested in this process can look through the draft maps, look at their community, look at the new proposed boundaries and say, ooh, that doesn't fit with what I'm thinking. And then they will be encouraged to go in and testify. Now, as May Malik mentioned, and as I mentioned as well, they're not required to submit for pre-clearance anymore. So they're not required to tell us the justification for why they came up with the maps. They're not required to say, we did this border because the population changed in this way, and therefore, we're hoping they will do that, but they're not required to anymore. But after the draft maps come out, so they come out with whatever lines they come out with. They're required, though, to follow that set of criteria I went through in the beginning, those first 4, and then they're encouraged to follow the next 4 that I went through again. So the 4 they have to, 1 person, 1 vote, so the population sizes, protecting minority votes, contiguous districts, and no crossover districts. Those are the 4 things they have to do. And then the other 4, keeping neighborhoods intact, keeping neighborhoods and community of interest intact is the most important of the ones they're supposed to do. But as a citizen, after they publish those draft maps, if it doesn't comport with your understanding of your community and how the line should be, that's where you come in and say, wait a second, you're doing this map, but that actually doesn't fly with what I'm thinking.
Yes, it does. I have a follow-up, but that absolutely answers my question. So from that, can I assume that a district, if there's no population change within the margin of error, however that's defined, then we can expect that those district lines remain the same?
No, good question, but no.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that, yeah, go ahead.
So firstly, to say, New York City, many, I don't want to say the majority because I don't know that offhand, but many districts saw population increase. So there are many, but even let's say if you're, and actually what do you know offhand what your council district is?
5.
5. Okay. So you are above, I can tell you offhand. Your neighborhood will have, your council lines will have to change, but think about maps as a jigsaw puzzle, right? So even if theoretically yours was not changed, meaning that your population size remained the same, if your neighbor's district had to change their lines because their population changed, that's going to affect you as well. And so it's going to be, a kind of domino effect of whose lines affect who.
So I'm trying to understand this, so forgive me for going on. I didn't know anything about this, so I really appreciate this. And you're very clarifying, so you're very helpful. Good. So then what is the benefit of, let's say the population increased in District 5, therefore there had to be a relining of the district in District 5. What is but let's say District 4 didn't have a change, they could conceivably stay the same, but because District 5 is changing, then maybe they're going to have to change too. And let's say that the next district doesn't have a population change, and so they can theoretically stay the same. In all of those scenarios, what is the benefit of who divides the district, whoever they are, but what is the benefit of them not explaining the reasons? What is the benefit of that secrecy? Adhering, you know, in the beginning, it had 4 things they had to do, 3 things they might do, but what's the benefit of not sharing all the rationale behind the changes?
Yeah, great, awesome questions. Again, 2 things. Firstly, just to, I mean, I know we're talking in theoretical, so I shouldn't really say this, but both Council District 4 and Council District 5 are above the current population limits, so both will have to have their lines redrawn. And many council districts throughout New York City would have had their population, and that's the whole purpose of redistricting, is because populations change in a 10-year cycle so drastically to re-proportion so that there's effective representation. So I know we're talking theoreticals, but just to point out, both districts will change. In terms of reasoning, there is none. And so this is exactly our role in the process, is we are a watchdog to encourage maximum transparency. We think secrecy is the enemy of the public. And so we are hoping and encouraging, and I think there's some encouraging signs that, that this will be an open process. And that's what we're hoping for. I think the public will benefit from it if it is, and so that's something we're encouraging. But the Supreme Court decision that struck down pre-clearance there's a lot of really negative results to that, in my opinion, just speaking as an individual here. And that's certainly one of them that's no longer.
Who physically does the redrawing? Who does it? Is it the legislature? I mean, who does it?
Great question. So again, we'll go back to this slide. I did it pretty quick, but it is the Districting Commission, which is made up of 15 people. Those 15 people have already been appointed, and they were appointed. 7 of them were by the mayor. So Mayor Adams appointed 7 people. The Republican caucus of the council appointed 3, and the Democratic caucus appointed 5. So that's the 15. They're already set. And as said, and here there's a couple restrictions on who can be on it, but that's who draws the lines.
Well, looking at this, it just seems, and then I'll end, but it just seems to me that there's a very substantial opportunity for this process to be political in terms of those who initially make the decision. So without, just by profile, so without the necessity of them giving you a rationale as to why they're making the changes, it seems to me that not you personally, but it just seems to me that the process is by its very nature non-transparent.
And will be political.
So in terms of the big thing here is that pre-clearance requirement from the Federal Voting Rights Act. That's a big deal nationwide. There's the New York State Voting Rights Act, which is currently making its way through the legislature. We'll see what that does. But yeah, I agree with you. And then the politicization of it is something to be thinking about and concerned by. I think that it is better than the state process because the commission holds the ultimate power instead of legislators. So yes, they are appointed by legislators, but they can't be a party. They can't be controlled by one party. And there's a couple of checks and balances there that kind of ensures some amount of lack of politicization, but it's certainly susceptible, as we saw with that Vito Lopez story. So that's something that we as an organization will be monitoring and watchdogging for on that side. And then we are also doing these presentations to get you all involved so that you can on that side. So hopefully both sides will keep it in check. I see a couple other hands. So let me go to the others, and then Michelle, whenever you want to ask again, feel free to.
Okay, no problem.
Boaz, I know you have your hand raised. I'm going to go to Elaine first, just because they have yet to ask something, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. A comment and then a question. I would hope that the city council members would look at what some of the objectives and goals are in what is a community and begin to respect communities. My question is, somebody running for the city council in 2023, do they have to live in the district, or do they have the option to move into the district if they win?
So as far as I know, the rule is that by the time they're sworn in, so by January 1st, 2024, they have to be in district, but they can announce their candidacy and run a campaign if they're a couple blocks outside of it.
Okay,
And that
just
has happened at the state level too. Yeah.
right. Okay, I just wanted to see if it was consistent. Thank you.
Yeah. Boaz?
Dan, excellent presentation. Believe it or not, I understand everything now about the mapping, zoning, district. I Google a few things. Fantastic, fantastic work. That's the good news. The bad news as an individual person, and I think that this is what Michelle is trying to say between the lines. I don't understand what should I do. I think it's above my head. You know, I think it's okay. I don't know what should I, you know, what should I ask? What should I be pro for? You know, okay, add this street, remove that street. So I think for the individual, this process is too complicated to understand what should the individual do. What I find it crazy that this is actually, I think that all this zoning, building those maps, this is excellent for the community board. And I don't understand how come the community board has not been plugged into this entire process. You know, I live in Upper East Side for the last 10 years, and I've been joining many of those community board 8 meetings, and I see people are talking about all kind of global warming, these things that, you know, probably the community board is not going to have any impact. And finally, there is something that is going to really, you know, this is going to change basically the community life in the coming months. This is the real deal. And I thought the time coming, you know, blank to this, to the entire deal here, but from Michelle and from other people, I see that they don't, I mean, this is new to them. So I think that maybe you came a little bit late. You should have come, you know, to the community board, like, I don't know, half a year ago, and they tell them, listen, this is coming, guys, this is coming, be prepared, you know, and start crunching the data and be ready. Because, for example, in your PowerPoint presentation, it's not clear who is actually doing the change. You showed, you know, that there are 8 people from this, 5 people from, but there are no names. Those people in the community board, Rita, I'm sure that they know all the players, you know? So it's like, I think that you come a little bit late, because if I understand correct, in June, they already have, you know, their, I mean, right now, probably all those
Bose,
people have agenda.
you have a question, we really have to start wrapping up, so.
That's it. Okay. My only suggestion, and I will communicate with you over emails, because I do have my only suggestion is start pushing it through the community board, and maybe give them what are the key players and give them a suggestion what they should do. That's it.
Well, that's a good introduction to what my next question was. Before we wrap up, there are 8 of us from the community board, 8. I'd like to get feelings. Do we want to take, now that we're told that we believe we can participate, and since we know our 2 districts will have to be changed, do we want to take this on as a project to make recommendations and testify on behalf of the community board? I'd welcome comments from all the community board members, because obviously you would be the ones who would be working on this. So what do we think? Do we want to do this?
I'll just start off by saying, yes, I think we should. I think the redistricting is obviously very important, and I think that we can certainly contribute. So yeah, I think we should.
Okay, anybody else? Ed, Ed, what do you think?
We got unmuted.
Yeah,
Since you're
I'm
an expert on
yeah,
this.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think absolutely. And I know, and again, I applaud Dan's, presentation, especially on the testimony on the 3 minutes, because I'm all for it all around. I'll just leave it at that. I'm
All right, let
gung
me
ho
ask
all around.
Dan, when will we have enough information or do we have to wait until June until the map comes out? Is that when do we mobilize is my question, if we want to do this?
Yeah, great question. So, in direct response to that, as said, the draft maps come out June 7th. There may be a preliminary hearing in May. And if there is a preliminary hearing in May, you would want to present at that, you'd want to testify at those hearings to influence that first round of maps, if it's possible. If it isn't possible, then the hearings, as said, they are required to hold their hearings before July 7th. So it's going to be sometime throughout June.
So if there's a map release, what do we respond to that? How do we?
If there isn't a map released, if there's a preliminary round, those preliminary hearings, and also you can go online and find testimony from the last cycle of the preliminary hearings just to sort of whet your appetite. If this is a project you take on, it's all public. But you would be talking about what you want in the district. So I think that the district lines should look like this as you make them. Or, I think this is my community of interest. I believe that it should remain all within Council District 5. Please ensure that it does. Or, the hospital wasn't in the district last time. Please include it in the district this time. Or whatever, whatever. Or my lines are perfect, keep them the same. Or, whatever, well, you can't in this case, but only, remove whatever blocks, whatever you think it should look like.
4 and 5 are next to each other. And if we both have to lose populations, either it's going to have to be up or it's going to have to be down,
Right.
Would it be chopped off the top or chopped off the bottom? Elaine, you haven't spoken on this.
I was going to say, I think Dan summarized it, I think we could begin to identify what it is we want in our community. And since there are 2 different community boards that we will be dealing with, we'll have to break it out. But to identify so that we are a community that is cohesive and has in it the components that Dan identified on that. I agree. It's either going to be the north or the south of us that gets cut, or pieces of us get cut into 5 and then 5. I mean, we're 5. I'm 5.
Yeah.
4.
5 gets cut a little. It goes to 4. 4 has to give away something somewhere here, and 4 does have a very strange, wiggly map versus 5 that is much more condensed and level. So 5 looks like 4 rather looks like it has a lot of wiggle there.
You know what? I want to just share my screen to show you one more tool. I think this is a conversation that y'all should definitely have, but probably offline. But I want to encourage it if possible. But there is one tool that is very helpful in this conversation, and that's the New York City Population Fact Finder. So let me just show you very briefly how to use it. It's the maps of New York City. Here, let me turn this off for a second. Okay, so if you do neighborhood tabulation area, it shows you the boundaries of every neighborhood, right? So let's go up here. So here's the neighborhood tabulation areas, right? Then you can add map layers. So you can click New York City Council districts. So now we see, okay, and you can click neighborhood. So let's say I click Upper East Side. So it's showing me the Upper East Side, and then it's showing me that part of the Upper East Side is cut off here between 4 and 5, but it shows you, you can click all the neighborhoods and see what the boundaries of the neighborhood are superimposed with the boundaries of the council district are. And then if you want to incorporate your community board into it, you can click community districts, and it gives you now in yellow, we see Manhattan 8. This is the community board, right? So you can look, you can play around with these things in a pretty comprehensive way. And then once you click these neighborhoods, you can also, if you click view data, you can look and it shows you all the data of those neighborhoods. So again, this is the New York City Population Fact Finder tool and can be incredibly helpful when you're playing around with that.
Great, thank you.
Of course, yeah. And the other thing, I just before it gets lost in here, I just want to respond to one of Boaz's comments about what can I do as an individual. Obviously, being a part of an organization is one thing, but I really want to encourage, even as an individual, the questions to ask yourself is, what policy concerns matter to me? What political communities or what things affect me? And then from there, that can be the drafting of your testimony. So, there's no unit too small to make an impact on this process. Okay, so let me go to Gail has yet to comment here, so I'll go to her.
Thank you, Dan. I think that was an excellent presentation. I think we all learned a lot. I frankly agree with what everybody else has said. I think we should move forward in looking into this further. It's our community, and if there's an opportunity for us to have a voice as to what we want, and we just sit back and then say, oh my gosh, look at these lines, X, Y, and Z components are not included, then it's on us as long as we do have that opportunity to look at this further. So I think we should definitely proceed and just see where we go from here and take a look at what our priorities are as a community. Those are my thoughts.
Rita? Rita, I think you're muted.
Hi. Thank you for this excellent presentation. I think we should go forward with it. I think that we as a group need to come up with the top 3 to 5 things that we need in the community, and then each of us can come behind and assert that point much more, not just one of us does one point and one of us does another point. This is a very complicated process, and our community changes almost every 10 minutes. Okay, not every 10 minutes, but every month we have a population change almost with the construction. So yes, I do agree. We really need to go forward, and thank you.
And then Michelle?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we should go forward because I always think we should take the opportunity to engage. I would never turn down any opportunity to engage. We feel like victims enough where we want things and we don't think our voices are heard, even when we express ourselves. So we're certainly not going to forfeit the opportunity to express ourselves. However, and this is not a disqualifier, this is just throwing this out there. This is very, very, very complicated. This is not a matter of looking at the area and saying, we want to keep the hospital, we want to keep this, we want to keep that, whatever. We have to figure out why the district was redistricted the way it was, which is why I would really appreciate some rationale from those that do the redistricting. I know they're not required to give it, but if there's any way we could get some of that insight, that would be good. But also to then understand thoroughly what each of those blocks represents in population. For example, if you're 50,000 over what the requirement is, and you're looking at blocks, it doesn't have to be the north, the south. It could be the east. It could be, the west. It could be wherever. But then you have to say, what do each of those blocks represent in population? Because you only want to give up the minimal amount that you have to give up. You don't want to over give up. So the research here is really quite extensive. Now, I assume, Dan, that in this wealth of resources that you've given us that we can go to and we can look, like the City Planning Commission maps and the population maps, I'm assuming that all this information is in there, that those are resources where we could get this information. But to make a reasoned approach here, we have to get that information. And that is hard to cull. You know what I mean? You need expertise.
So I want to say two things. Firstly, in terms of, and I know we're going over here, so we can wrap up. But just in terms of justification, they were required the last cycle, so you can actually fairly easily find out why they made the lines they did. I'm going to share my screen again. I looked at the basics, and here's what their basic justification was. Although there's a lot more information where this came from, but for District 4, it says the primary, this is for 2012, just to be clear. So what has made the lines for the last decade? The primary factor for District 4 is the need to adjust the population size to balance. So apparently there was a loss of population, and then District 3's relative growth. So clearly 10 years ago, the dynamic was, I don't know this offhand, but District 3 grew, District 4 lost size. So that was why they made the lines what they did. As a result, District 3 acquired portions of Murray Hill, the fashion district in Midtown, from District 3. The addition of population on the northern boundary allows District 8 to extend further into the Bronx, which is necessary to achieve more proportion council. And this hopefully isn't too complicated, but with the one person, one vote. And then District 5 changed. Here's the neighborhoods. The district expands at the northern boundary up to 97th, acquiring population from District 4. As mentioned above, these changes allow District 8 to extend further into the Bronx. So that was the justification 10 years ago. There's a lot more. You can look at every testimony from 10 years ago, read it, look at all the maps submitted. I mean, there's just an endless amount of information, but that was the justification for the final maps at the most basic level for those two districts. And then in terms of the complication, it depends how deep you want to go. But if you think of just at the very basic element, what are the needs of my community? Like, what is the most essential factor of it? It can be as complicated or as not complicated as you have capacity for. So I said something is better than nothing. And if you have capacity for very little and just to make one statement on one thing, that's better than nothing. So.
All right, I have a question. Do we have to pass a resolution and have it passed by the board to allow us to go forward? I would assume we can't go off on our own. Will, any thought on that?
You don't have to pass a resolution to keep pursuing something, but whatever your final testimony will be should be reviewed by the board, meaning it should come in either form of some sort of like.
Oh, okay. So that's fine. So we can just continue.
At this point, we can move forward, and it's not until we come up with a product that we need to have it approved. Okay, I was just,
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, we are at the end of our time. So Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
An excellent presentation.
Hey.
And you got the cream of the crop of the community board on this call. These are the people who are really involved in this type of issue. And I think you've really motivated us to get involved and to come up with, what a recommend. I mean, I already think they're gonna pull off Roosevelt Island is what I'm thinking. That probably would be what, the most obvious, but who knows? But again,
I don't know.
Yeah, share whatever you have, and I'll send it to Will, or please copy Will, and he can then send it out to the public.
I don't know if I have Will's email address. So Sherry, I may just send it to you and you can connect us.
And I'll give it to you in the chat.
Yeah, but we will be, okay. That works too.
All right. And what I'm going to suggest with Anthony's consent, I think we'll schedule a meeting next month, kind of as a brainstorming meeting, and kind of get our hands around it and then figure out where we need to go, and maybe we can recruit. I'm surprised Marco isn't on, and I know Alita left, but we need some of our regulars to help divide up the workload on this. So great. Well, again, Dan, thank you so much. We Because if we were your first guinea pigs, I think you did great. There's nothing that I'm really, suggesting. I know Michelle felt you shouldn't have taken questions in the middle because it was confusing. So keep that as a possibility. But otherwise, I think it was great, and go out and spread the word.
Yeah, that's what I want to end on. So firstly, again, thank y'all so much. As said, this is our beginning of this process. We were heavily involved in the state process. Now the state is more or less over, and now we're turning our attention to this. And so we really do want to connect with as many groups as possible. I've reached out to plenty of groups in your area. I haven't heard from many of them, but if you're involved in any of their groups, please connect me. We really want to, if you anywhere in the city, really, if you know people that might be interested, connect me. And otherwise, yeah, it's really been a pleasure. Y'all have been wonderful group. So
Anthony, anything?
Anthony,
any last word? No.
No last words from me.
Okie dokie. Then everybody, thank you so much for participating, and I'll be in touch with Will to get us a meeting date for next month. Thank you again. Great program.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Bye.